Have you ever wondered how natural selection acts on humans now? Me neither, but that's the question that I need to answer, so let's get to it. Let's start by defining what natural selection is, and then, after I give you some background information, I'll show you some examples of it acting on human evolution throughout history. I'll give you some interesting viewpoints about how natural selection applies to humans today. And finally, I'll give you my informed opinion on the matter. There seems to be a lot of confusion about what natural selection is. Somehow, 155 years after Darwin, a lot of people seem to have wrongful ideas about it. Natural selection is one of the main mechanisms driving evolution. Essentially, natural selection is a process by which organisms with favorable variations survive and reproduce at a higher rate. This inherited variation that increases an organism's chances of survival in a particular environment is called an adaptation. Over many generations, an adaptation can spread throughout the population. This means that having specific traits can affect an organism's differential reproductive success. Differential reproduction is the idea that those organisms best adapted to a given environment will be more likely to survive to reproductive age and produce viable offspring. That is, their fitness. To be more specific, variations are present between organisms of a population, and environmental pressures will select or favor some organisms over others based on those variations. Over time, this leads to a higher frequency of that advantageous variation in the population. For example, when our ancestors moved from Africa into certain continents like Europe, there was a selective pressure from the environment for people with lighter skin tones. It turns out that dark skin doesn't do a good job reproducing vitamin D3 in the dark, cold, cloudy, brutal winter of Norway. So white people had higher chances of survival and therefore higher chances of passing down their genes. But that's not all. On the low UV environment, people had to get extra vitamin D from their diet, so lactose tolerance became a thing. While living in Africa, dark skin is an advantage because of the much higher UV levels. Okay. Simple, right? Well, apparently not. A lot of people out there still have a Lamarckian viewpoint of things, where acquired characteristics are inherited, and disuse of body parts makes them disappear, which is really sad. To give some credit to Lamarck, we now have a branch of genetics called epigenetics that allows for changes in gene expression to be inherited. However, Lamarck only gets partial credit because at his time we didn't know what DNA was, much less had an idea of any of the mechanisms of gene expression. Technology allows us to survive without depending as much on our genes as our ancestors did. For example, if you're dark skinned and you live in Norway, you could simply buy a supplement that has vitamin D on it. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about not being fast enough to chase after your dinner or escaping a predator. Unless you live in Australia, in which case it's a different story. Or something as basic as not keeping an erection long enough to actually fertilize an egg. We have a pill for that now. Also, far it seems like natural selection is gone. I mean, apparently technology allows us to cheat nature and avoid natural selection, but it's really not that simple. It turns out that there are some special cases of natural selection acting on humans today. Essentially, there is different mechanisms involved in natural selection, and some of those are still applying to us. The best example of this is sexual selection. Darwin observed that there are some characteristics that do not appear to help an organism adapt to their environment and therefore are not explained by natural selection. He suggested that they feature in the process of sexual selection. He defined the process by saying that it depends on the advantage which certain individuals have over other individuals of the same sex and species in exclusive relation to reproduction. His observations and analysis led to the reasoning that sexual selection works in two main ways, either through competition among members of one sex for access to members of the other sex, for example, combat, or through choice by members of one sex for certain members of the other sex. In the final chapter of his book, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, Darwin discussed sexual selection in man. He stated that any deliberate mate selection is of woman, and not the other way around. Therefore, it is female features that are important in mating success, such as beauty, red lips, bigger breasts, and even artificial artifacts such as makeup and jewelry. Darwin also identified that different cultures have different views of human attractiveness. It should be noted that in modern humans, sexual selection probably operates indirectly through social hierarchies rather than through direct competition. Men may compete for elevation in hierarchies, and women tend to favor high status men. Differential access to women is attained more through the medium of hierarchies and less through direct competition. Don't believe me? Google dating sites. We also have something called kin selection, a type of natural selection that considers the role of relatives in the genetic fitness of a given individual. Kin selection is natural selection working at the level of the family rather than the individual. Kin selection occurs when an animal engages in self-sacrificial behaviors that benefit the genetic fitness of its relatives. For example, a worker honeybee who gives up her life when facing a danger that threatens her hive. In humans, this behavior is present on a conscious level. We don't really have a automatic unconscious ability to recognize someone as kin. We make connections with previous knowledge that we had, unlike sexual selection that works at a hormonal level. It's sort of on the background. Now, to conclude, I'll give you my personal opinion on the matter. It appears to me that natural selection has sort of adapted to our technological advances and the growing complexity of our society, which is very intriguing, but that's what I think is happening. That's what I think happened. Because even though we have all this technology that allows us to sort of cheat natural selection, natural selection has kind of adapted to our technological advances. Because all these special mechanisms of natural selection, such as sexual selection or kin selection, are still applied to us. And unless we become robots or something, I personally believe that natural selection is still going to be a thing out there, influencing and directing human evolution. Natural selection is one of the main mechanisms driving evolution, and evolution is possibly the most important theory in biology. Evolution helps explain the structure and function of all living things and how the diversity of life came into existence. Therefore, as a life science major, this topic is of great importance for me and will remain being of great importance regardless of any future career choices. Alright, so that's all. Thanks for watching.